living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. I have one of my favorite guests here today, Highland Buddy Fowler. Good to see you, sir.
It's good to see you, Woody, again this year. And again, I make sure that on the ballot when election day it has Buddy on there, because I don't think anybody in my district would know who Highland Fowler is. But so yeah, that's a very important. Delegate Buddy Fowler.
Well, congratulations. You were re-elected. You're back here, but there have been some major changes.
There's been some major changes. Again, my first 6 years, I had the privilege of being in the majority. And of course, now we find ourselves in the minority, due to electoral fortunes. And so there are now 45 Republicans in the House delegates versus 55 in the Democrats. And again, but obviously it does affect the way legislation is going to move through the Assembly. But as far as for me personally, I put in the bills that I think that are good, and I'm going to present them to the committees. And I think if they're good bills, I think they should probably pass. So again, we just obviously, now the Republicans, we don't have the responsibility for try to run everything like we did before. So we can, I guess, focus on our legislation and perhaps pointing out some deficiencies when they occur.
I'm sure you're going to do that. And you have a new speaker and a new majority leader on the House side of the Democratic Party, and things have kind of flipped on the Republican side as well in terms of leadership.
That's correct. Well, now Delegate Todd Gilbert is now our minority leader. Again, he's been in the legislature for, I'm not sure the exact number of years, I want to say 12, 14 years, I believe, possibly, and he is absolutely a good leader, and I'm real happy to have him leading our efforts on the House floor. He has a pretty good skill set.
And you have significantly the same number of committees, I believe. I think you have 3 this year that you're on.
Yes, sir. I continue to have 3 committees. I'm still a member of the House Finance Committee and the House General Laws Committee, but I was moved over onto the Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee. So again, I look forward to working with Chairman Sickles on that committee, and work towards improving our healthcare system, access to healthcare, and some other things. So it's a very important committee as well.
And then you've got Delegate Vivian Watts, I think, who chairs the Finance Committee. That's a pretty important committee, is it not?
Finance Committee is very important. Again, on the House Delegate side, we have 2 basically money committees. The House Finance Committee is responsible for raising the revenue that's required by the House Appropriations Committee to fund our priorities in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and of course our priorities most notably are public education, higher ed, health care, public safety, transportation, on down the line. So that's the job of appropriations. Our job is to raise the money. So again, we have the tough job. When you get your tax return, that comes from us, but they have the fun job. They get to spend the money. So.
And then the General Laws Committee, I think, is chaired by David Bulliver.
David Bulliver's from Fairfax. I think he will be a good chairman. General Laws casts a pretty wide net on the Commonwealth housing and apartments, renter stuff, all that is in there. All the ABC legislation.
That's alcohol beverage control.
Beverage, yep, that all goes through general law. So, wine, beer, and spirits. All the employment stuff, all that goes through general law. So it's, I know I'm leaving stuff out, but it's a very busy committee.
So you've got plenty enough to keep you busy.
A lot on my plate
this session. Well, what about your constituents? How's your district doing, especially in terms of the economy?
Well, I think our district, just like I guess most of Virginia, as well as the nation, has been our economy is going strong, and part of that is the tax and regulatory environment that we have here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but also the tax and regulatory changes that's been going on up in Washington has also had obviously a positive effect on Virginia's economy, just like the other states in the nation. So things are good. That being said, from a policy standpoint, the General Assembly, even with a good economy and an increased tax revenue, there's never enough money to go around. So again, that's where we have to come in and prioritize how much money we're going to put in each individual, basket. So we still have challenges, but the good news is we don't have to be looking at maybe draconian cuts to anything. So
I believe the statewide average unemployment rate is 2.6%. Is that about what it is in your district?
I think that's what we have. I think nationwide it's about 3.5%, I believe, and Virginia usually has always has a little bit better unemployment than say other states do, and I think part of that is because of Northern Virginia and other places are a little bit more immune to economic downturns because of all the employment and financial stuff going on in Northern Virginia with respect to federal action. So again, we're very blessed here. I think basically most economists would say 2.5% is basically full employment, and of course that's good for labor because it requires employers to bid against each other for hiring people. So again, I know one of the big issues at the General Assembly this year is increasing the minimum wage, which again, the minimum wage, the wage is already going up because of the economic activity, and I've always kind of felt that was a much better way to increase wages as opposed to doing it by government fiat.
So where do most people work in your district? Who are the major employers?
Now that's hard to say. Now Virginia, Hanover County, we have a lot of, I'm not sure who actually the largest employee is. I know Bear Island is going through a restructuring, so that was obviously a large employer. They do timber and making products out of timber. Obviously Kings Dominion is a large employer. Of course, that's somewhat seasonal, but we have just a lot of other medium to small employers. If you go, say, for instance, over at the Hanover Airpark, there's just numbers of businesses there, and it's the same way sprinkled all the way over, say, from in Mechanicsville going on the 360 corridor over to the Route 1 corridor. You'll find a lot of commercial and industrial development there, and so I'm not sure what the breakout of, say, how many Hanover residents actually work in Hanover, but actually I think probably one of the largest employers too in Hanover would be the Bon Secours Memorial Regional Hospital there in Mechanicsville. That may very well be our largest employer, but folks in Hanover won't have a hard time trying to find employment, I can promise you.
Now you mentioned timber. What about farming? Are there many farms?
Agriculture. Now in my district, I think agriculture and timber is probably the overall largest industry, because there's once you leave the Mechanicsville, I-95 corridor between, say, Route 1 and 360, and then you got the town of Ashland. Most of my district is primarily rural, with agriculture and timber obviously being the largest, largest economic impact. I don't have an exact number on that, but still that is a very large industry and economic engine for the 55th House District, absolutely.
Do you think any of those, either timber or farming, export any agricultural products through the Port of Virginia, for example?
I would be stunned if they didn't, because again, our agricultural imports or exports, have been going up as a result of some of the trade initiatives, obviously going on in Washington, Virginia, and of course our governor over the last several administrations has also worked extremely hard to open up markets for our agriculture products, and I can't name all of them, but I know soybeans is obviously a very large one, and I think in Asia, in Japan and Asia and other Asian countries, I think import a fair amount of soybeans. But yes, absolutely. And again, the Port of Virginia, and serving on the Finance Committee, we've had a lot of activity dealing with the Port of Virginia through tax credits and other things to help them modernize that port. We are now the number 2 port of Virginia for economic activity, and so it's a huge economic engine. It's my understanding that the Port of Virginia amount for about 10% of Virginia's gross domestic product.
That much, 10%.
It's a huge number. So even though you may not know about the Port of Virginia or even where it is, it still impacts you in a very significant way, and at this point, a positive economic way. Yes.
Matter of fact, on finance, I'm sure you've seen the kinds of money devoted to that port in terms of deepening that port.
Oh man, I got to tell you, it's just, I'm sure it's in the tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. But the modernization, I'm not sure if they've done with the dredging yet. But the scope of this port is unbelievable. It's my understanding that now they will guarantee these new super tankers they're building that go through the Panama Canal. We guarantee them 24-hour turnaround. If they come into the port, dock up, we'll have them unloaded and on their ways in a 24-hour period. So again, it's incredible.
And of course, I think that port has been widened as well because you have a lot of Navy traffic there.
A lot of Navy traffic. Obviously, that's a challenge, but unfortunately, our professionals at the port, as well as the professionals on the Navy, can run their ships, I think, pretty good. So I'm not aware of any problems so far. But it's amazing the size of the port there, where you can put 2 of those big Panama Canal tankers end to end at the same time. I mean, it's
and
yeah.
I think the state has invested more money in those huge cranes in order to offload. And
absolutely, yeah, that was all part of the expansion that we funded through the tax credits. About, I want to say it's been 3 or 4 years ago now, I believe, but it's so it's paying a big dividend for Virginia and for our taxpayers.
And there's an inland port at Front Royal that, yes, I believe brings stuff up by rail and distributes it by truck and rail throughout the country.
They also benefited from the Port of Virginia Act, as well as the port in Richmond is actually part of that as well. So the Port of Richmond is actually, I think, offloading more more cargo now as well. So absolutely. So it's that's commerce. Commerce, creates revenue, and revenue creates jobs, and it's all good.
So you've got your hand in a lot of really good economic development.
Amen.
What kind of initiatives are you pursuing this year? I know you've got some legislation that you pre-filed.
Yes, I did. Pre-filed. I'm carrying a couple of bills for the Virginia Game Commission. Being a lifelong hunter and fisherman, I have a couple of bills that I'm carrying, and they will usually come to me because they know I understand this stuff. And so I have one bill that will allow the Game Commission to get a little bit more revenue for the maintenance of their boat ramps. And then I have another legislation, which I called the gentleman today. I think I may have to get an amendment, but to deal with poaching and things like that, which being a lifelong sportsman, I take a dim view of people that poach or otherwise trespass or do a lot of other things. Because again, Virginia has you have a constitutional right to hunt, but you do not have a constitutional right to tread upon other people's property or poach, or violate our game laws.
So where are those boat ramps? I assume they need maintenance or they need upgrades. Is that what?
That's correct. And again, they get a lot of use, and so again, and then that requires maintenance. And there's a lot of folks, including myself, that might like to see maybe access expanded with maybe some new boat ramps. And so again, all that requires money. So again, the Game Commission doesn't receive any general fund money. So all the money that they get comes through their hunting and fishing licenses, boat registration fees. We can draw down some federal funds from the Pittman-Robertson Act based on the number of license sales. And then we have what we also call the House Bill 38, which collects some sales tax on firearms and ammunition and other sporting merchandise. So they get a little bit of money from that House Bill 38. So the Game Commission, though, runs a tight budget. So
does that commission determine, for example, the different hunting seasons and what kinds of firearms can be used?
On the seasons, yes, and because again, they're biologists and all professionals. I like to let the professionals, set those kinds of things. They go out and do a stock assessment of various animals in different parts of the state, and then they will. And of course, you can harvest a certain percentage of various animals, and so the Game Commission will set their length of season and perhaps bag limits in order to properly manage, various species. Now, with respect to various firearms, that can be a Department of Game and Fisheries as well as local ordinances, because in some localities they will not allow hunters to use high-powered rifles like a person would use for deer or bear. So but that's usually set out in the game laws. They'll have which localities do certain things, and so.
Yeah, because
it can be a little bit confusing. You need to follow the rules, though, or you'll find yourself in trouble.
There's certain times at the beginning of the season when you can only use bows, then you can use black powder, then you can use long guns for the rest of the season, I believe.
That's correct.
But I take it they don't have any jurisdiction over menhaden fish, do they?
No, that is no. The DGIF doesn't. That comes under Virginia Marine Resources Commission, because that's saltwater. VMRC is out over the saltwater, and as well as some of these species too, go up and down the coast, and a lot of those fish are managed by what we call the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and that's offshore. I think VMRC can obviously only manage, I think maybe out to a certain limit, or in the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, things like that. So it's a little, you need to,
Boy, there's a lot there. So that's one initiative you have that took us off on quite a bit. What are some of the others that you're pursuing?
I'm going to be introducing a bill, which I just sent it to the desk today, on school board salaries. Right now, in Virginia we have appointed school boards, and I don't know, not really that many just jurisdictions now, maybe about 20. Most school boards are elected, but they have a different system for salaries and salary increases, and it's a little bit more of a difficult process for local governments to do the appointed school board. So where I live in Hanover still has an appointed school board. So after looking at
who makes those?
Well, the Board of Supervisors in Hanover appoints the school board members. So basically what I want to do, which I think makes a lot of sense, I know sometimes that's hard to find around here, but my legislation would basically just put the appointed school boards in terms of pay in the same posture as the elected ones, so it's like a one-size-fits-all solution. I think that'll save folks a lot of time and a lot of headaches. So that's one of the bills I put in. Let me see. I've got a bill on transparency. I think that's important with government procurement. So I have a bill in last year. That bill came out of the Senate, but we couldn't get my bill or the Senate bill out of the House.
So what would that require in terms of
what that
transparency?
bill does is in the procurement process with higher education, you know, if you are going to receive, let's say, a no bid contract from a Virginia college or university, then it's a contractor. If the contract is over, I think $5 million, you have to disclose whether or not you have made any contributions or donations to the college. I think that's important, and so that's one bill I have, that, and I'm trying to think of some others. I didn't have a lot. I've got another bill to try to readdress the move over law, which is, Delegate Peace carried it last year, and it was a great legislation. The House version had would also include the towing and recovery people into that move over to, and of course the Senate disagreed on that, and then the governor put it back in during the veto session, but we weren't able to get it done. And again, I think the reason, especially on the interstates where we need to carve out the towing and recovery people for the same type of protection, is that they are called out on the interstates by the state police. And usually the state police are there, but sometimes they're not. And of course, these big towing and recovery trucks, they're providing a public service of cleaning the wreckage, off the interstate, so the traveling public can get upon their journey as quickly as possible. So again, I've got that bill in.
So what kind of protection do they need?
Well, right now, the folks for the bill that passed last year for the fire and EMS, first responders, and all that, they if you don't move over for them, you can be charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor in reckless driving. And so, but the towing and recovery would just be a traffic infraction. See, so that's the difference. So, and we may have to massage this bill a little bit, but that's where we are right now. I'm just checking, make sure state police are fine with it and things like that. So that's another bill. Again, I think that, like I say, given the fact that, they're not out there looking for work, they're called out there by the state police to get out there and provide a public service, which is making sure our roads are clear and folks can get from, to their appointed destination.
What about redistricting? I guess the General Assembly will have to pass once more a resolution that was passed last year, setting up a commission to determine the state legislative district lines as well as the congressional district legislative
That's correct.
lines.
I guess 2020 there will be a census, federal census. Now we'll come back in, I guess, well, we'll know what the census says next year. But again, last year we passed, and again, I was on the privileged elections last year, and I supported that bill, which would create kind of some what we call redistricting reform. So, for a constitutional amendment, we have to pass it 2 years in a row, which we'll get what we call the second resolution this year will be before us. And then and then we'll also have enabling legislation to actually do the other things that go with the amendment, but that's up again this year. So again, I hope it will be that we will pass it. Now, I typically have resisted redistricting reform in some of the other bills I saw, but this bill provided, the General Assembly with the final authority to give the final approval on what the redistricting commission came up with. So again, I was able to support that bill because I didn't believe the General Assembly should hand over their legislative responsibility to an unelected body. But
now that's a commission, a 16-member commission, I believe. That
sounds about right. I don't have it in front of me.
Some
but
of
yes.
it's
And it was a bipartisan.
Right. Some of
commission.
it will be members, some of it will be citizens, I believe. But if they can't agree, as I understand it, then the Virginia Supreme Court has the final say on what the boundaries.
Yeah,
will be.
I'd have to go back and exactly look word by word, but I believe that's correct. And again, the General Assembly would have to approve the whatever the work product was. But again, I think again, it's probably not a perfect solution, but it's an improvement over the status quo. And I was happy to support that bill, and will support it if it comes in front of me.
So if the resolution passes once more, then I, as a voter, will have an opportunity to vote on it.
I trust the people of Virginia, so absolutely it'll go to the people on this November election, and to vote to approve the constitutional amendment. I think since it's a presidential year, I think we'll have a pretty big turnout. So, and the people ultimately will decide.
So some of your Democratic colleagues appear to be having buyer's remorse on something they voted in favor of last year.
It's I really don't know if I can speak to that, but I have heard that some of them have. But I think there's a lot of them that I have talked to or prepared to move forward. Again, I think it's I think if you're intellectually honest, a good idea that was good last year, I think is probably still good this year.
There was another piece of legislation I noticed. It has to do with moving a primary to June.
That's another bill that I put in. So thank you for reminding me, Woody. That's actually a very important bill for a lot of reasons. And I actually put that bill in about 4 years ago, and maybe 5 years ago, and I got it out of the House Privileges and Elections Committee some kind of way. But then I had to end up spiking my own bill, and then I think Steve Landis carried it last year. And it passed the House, but kind of ran out of steam in the Senate.
So what would it do?
And what that bill basically does is it moves Virginia's primary election day from the second Tuesday in June to the third Tuesday in June, which again, that's when schools are typically closed for the year, and so we don't interfere with the last few days of school. And then I think also, from my perspective, I think there are some security concerns again about folks going in and out of the school system. So, which again, school security has obviously been a big issue over the last few years. So again, given the fact that Delegate Landis retired, I thought, I'll go ahead and reintroduce that bill, and hopefully we can get that done.
Got less than a minute left.
Yes,
I want to give you an opportunity to tell me how you will measure success for Delegate Fowler this year.
Well, I think the one way I'll measure my success is to the extent that I keep my word to the voters of the 55th district, which again, I think that's an important measure of a delegate and an adult. And so again, I hope we will not. That at the end of the day, my constituents and the folks of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia will be just as free at the end of the session as they were at the beginning of the session. So thank you, Woody.
Good to see you again, Delegate Buddy Fowler. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.